Okay, this is it. Today is the day. For the first time in my life, I'm going to make a truly original artistic statement. Because yes, I realize that everything I've ever done, everything is completely derivative, is nothing more than a simmering ragu of my major influences, which would be, in no particular order, Married with Children, Led Zeppelin, the movie Clue, Sally Ride, Emo Phillips, Wilson Phillips, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Philip Sousa, Philip Screwdrivers, Gina Davis. Oh, Gina Davis. Hi, Gina. It's me. You never answered any of my... Never mind. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Weird Al Yankovic, Meryl Shoes, the Punch Brothers, anything Emily Haynes ever did. Anyway, forget all of it. I'm just going to sit here in this room until I have a thought which is completely original, which does not have so much as a vibram enclosed toe on the shoulders of those giants who came before me. Okay, here I go. All I could think of was three girls singing harmony and playing Clue, and one of them was kind of overweight, and they all looked like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm a fraud. Okay, I'm nothing. I will never be original. Although, come to think of it, did any of them ever say those specific things, that they were, nothing? I could be onto something really fresh and new. Today on The Nose, our panel will talk about Rush Limbaugh, Conan O'Brien, a controversial punter, Subarus and lesbians, and a restaurant critic who's letting the world see what he looks like. And now he finally finished binge-watching the Yule Log channel, and he hated Season 4. Colin McEnroe.
Or as I call it, burning bad. All right, so they're already groaning. They're already in rebellion against me. Usually doesn't happen until the first 15 minutes or so. All right, joining us today for The Nose, Irene Papoulis from Trinity College, where she is a professor. Jim Chapdelaine is a professor of music and producing and winning Emmys and stuff like that. And Tracy Wu Fastenberg, who's a professor of, adorableness, among other things, at the Mark Twain House. She's very pregnant right now. Could we say your due date on the air? Is that okay? Is that
April 10th.
An invasion of your privacy? Yeah. So you'll have other appearances.
Yeah, I've got a little time.
Yeah. Has the doctor told you specifically when you have to stop being on The Nose? Does that come up?
Detrimental to your health.
Yeah. All right. So that's who's here. And I'll tell you a little bit about we really. I mean, we're always kind of churning emails out when we do this. We come up with topics, and then we come up with more topics. And for about 24 hours, depending on who's on the panel, there's sort of a lot of back and forth discussions, a lot of clicking reply to all. Today didn't set the record. There have been other ones that have set the record. But we had a lot of discussions, I think, about this, partly because maybe there aren't any really sort of super burning news issues, but also because we got really interested in certain threads, certain things that kind of seem to make sense in conjunction with one another. So later in the show, we will tell you the story of Chris Kluwe, who is the punter, was the punter for the Minnesota Vikings, got cut and has written of late a very long, very passionate essay for the website Deadspin, in which he basically says that he got cut because of his views, which include being in favor of gay marriage and opposed to some of the former practices of the Roman Catholic Church, and that the people who cut him were cowards and worse. And so anyway, that's to come. But I think that sort of ties into some other issues we'll be talking about in the second segment. So if that's of interest to you, please do think about calling us then. And then prior to that, sort of for the first segment, what we're going to talk about is we're going to start with a very small controversy that doesn't mean anything, but we think, based on the discussions that we had about it online, that it could come to mean something over the course of the show. So let me also tell you where to call in. Although I have to sort of break the fourth wall and say the computer isn't switched into this room right now. So if people call in, I won't be able to see unless somebody.
A second. You use a computer?
Maybe Tucker can. Wave at Tucker out there. See if you can flip the computer over. All right. So our number is 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. You may tweet at us at WNPR Colin. We're having one of these days, too, where like half the people who would ordinarily work here are out for various reasons. So we're in a different configuration. My computer just came on. That was great. All right. So here we go. It all starts. I can't remember who first suggested this topic. I think it was Betsy. The topic was that Rush Limbaugh was complaining about Conan O'Brien. So you know that this is not a really major story. Does anybody want to try to explain what it is that he was? I mean, I can do it, but class.
Yeah. Class. Okay, teacher. Conan O'Brien had one of those series of clips from local news in which every single local news reporter in all different kinds of places, wearing all different kinds of outfits, said the exact same thing. And the thing that they said was, it's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10
Do you want to actually hear the clip? I think we have that one. Okay, we have that clip, I think.
It's okay. You can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay. You can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay. You can admit it. You've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay. You can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay. You can admit it if you bought an item or 2.
You get the picture. So that was on Conan. And Rush said what?
Rush said, wait a minute, he's using a technique that I invented back when Cheney was chosen to be the vice president for George Bush, because everyone was using the word gravitas to describe Cheney, and I had the clips of lots of people using the word gravitas, so I invented it.
We can also show you that. Let's hear a little gravitas.
His weaknesses, lack of gravitas. We see the son who is seeking some gravitas.
They were looking at candidates with gravitas.
But he has the gravitas. You can sum it up in one word, stature.
It may go to the gravitas.
Or to use the favorite phrase, gravitas.
This is a vice president.
Well, you get the idea.
Stature was in there, too.
Yeah, stature.
Yeah, stature.
Gives a little break.
Yeah.
So, I mean, nobody invented this, right? I mean...
I don't think so. I actually Googled gravitas, and it came into popular use in 1869. But before we start, I have to say to Cayenne, look who thinks she's nothing. You know, come on. We've all thought we were nothing.
Oh, so you don't even think that was an original idea?
Yeah, come on. No, that was a great open. So, it's been in common use, and that leads us to what's original, but we maybe want to get there after we unpack this little Rush thing a little bit more. Has Rush really even come up with anything original, or is he just pandering all the time or repackaging stuff all the time?
Well, significantly, the one person that Rush will admit to having ever imitated, Larry Lujak, a DJ, a sort of Midwestern Chicago-based DJ, died a couple of weeks ago. So it was in the New York Times right around Christmas time.
And Bob Grant.
And Bob Grant, who Rush probably did imitate, whether he would admit it or not, also died. I don't know exactly what that has to do with it, but it ties in somehow. No, to me, one of the interesting things about this is that that Larry Lujak, who Rush did claim to have emulated and perhaps imitated and stuff like that, was not really interested in having that credit on his agenda. He actually sort of said, well, I don't really see his appeal, and I don't really see what he's got to do with me. And to me, that's the worst insult. Not you ripped me off, but you claim you ripped me off, and I would prefer not to be associated with you. I don't want the credit of your imitation. But it did. I mean, as we were sort of sharing emails about this, one of the things that I said, well, actually, let me go back to Irene for a second, because one of the things that you said was that forget about Rush for a second. This is something that everybody kind of does.
Well,
right?
actually, and I got to that by saying, yes, it's easy to sort of make fun of Rush, but then I started to sort of sympathize with him in a way, with that feeling of, wait a minute, you're doing something I did, and I'm not getting any credit for the fact that you're doing it. And this is something that I kind of invented, and we sort of have, and then it just got me thinking about the ways in which I have certain things, like I was thinking sometimes when you use a word, you use a word in conversation, and then somebody else uses the exact same word as though they just thought of it out of the blue, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm the one that used the word conflate the first time, or whatever, in this particular conversation, or I'm the one that wore those, I have these, certain kind of earrings that I used to wear every single day, and then I saw one of my colleagues wearing them, and I thought, hey, wait a minute, those are mine. That's mine. And
so far, this is a great Rush impersonation. You got to take that on the road.
It's sort of an Elaine Venice impersonation. I think this is. I can see this as an Elaine rant on Seinfeld. Right. I am the conflate person.
Right.
You're saying
yours is
that was my word.
You're verisimilitude. You've always been verisimilitude.
Well, anyway, I fired back at Irene with sort of the typical thing that people say, which is, that nobody has any original ideas, that the very, very 99.999% of what we do is, in fact, in all the ways suggested by Wolfie's intro, just built on or on the work of other people, on, at minimum, a fusion or transmogrification of a bunch of other ideas that came before, because there just aren't that many really original ideas. And when they occur, they bug us anyway because they're too original, which then depressed Tracy. So I'll let you pick up the story.
Well, you had asked us each to, can we each come up with something that's truly original? And being the little overachieving student, I'm sitting there thinking and thinking and thinking. And of course,
never ask an Asian person to do something like that. It's
exactly.
It's going to drive them crazy.
Just going to get us all in trouble. And I was thinking, and everything I could think of seemed to be derivative of something else. You think of something that was really sort of revolutionary for its time, but it all evolved from something else that predecessed it. And that's sort of depressing, Or even I was trying to think of some of my friends who are amazing artists or, creators or whatnot. And you know what? They all have their influences that they would admit to and proudly say, these are the people that influence me. But so that doesn't make it truly original, which then backs it up to what is truly original. So, and that was sort of sad that I couldn't come up with a good answer.
You know what? The wheel. Start with the wheel. Start with the wheel.
Well, Jim, as a musician, I think you've got a unique perspective on this. And most musicians will cop to the position that I laid out, right? Most musicians will say, if you think you're doing something really original, that just means you haven't quite figured out what it is that influenced you in the first place.
Especially right now where we're, I think, in the middle of the second great banjo scare of our days. Where folk music is being revisited but not reinvented, and there's a whole generation there's inside Llewellyn Davis, I think every now and then in music, my discipline, there is somebody who's a game changer, whether it's Louis Armstrong or Stephen Foster or Charlie Parker, and that vocabulary they develop 50 years later is now in jingles. And we've totally absorbed whatever. In fact, it was Louis Armstrong who said of Charlie Parker, I won't attempt to imitate him, but he said, this sounds like Chinese music to me.
Well, yeah, and in fact, that's Adam Gopnik, I think, had something about this in the New Yorker not too long ago, that the irony of that, too, is that you can be brilliant working on that stretch of flat water where, in fact, nothing really truly new is happening. So, and I think one of the ideas that he said was that for Duke Ellington, who had really perfected a kind of big band orchestral kind of jazz music, bebop must have been an incredible slap in the face in the sense that suddenly it rendered less imaginative what he was doing. It was suddenly an original statement where he was really kind of developing something where he had built on the work of others.
Or Einstein being unable to wrap his head around quantum physics after changing the way we think.
It also might be. I'm really on thin ice here. I'm way outside my area of expertise. You could even make a similar argument. I think that you can the argument that you can be brilliant without having been able to grasp the next original thing that happened about Bach. That really, the music that came after Bach, as great as Bach was, it was a kind of symphonic music that he didn't really do or write or something.
Because he was writing music on the way to the gig in his coach because he was so prolific. He was like just wailing, this is just a jingle to me, and it'd be a two-part invention.
Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about in that instance. So send me emails telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking that I have had, I teach writing, and so I've had at least, I would say probably over the years, at least 10 or 15 students who've said to me, I don't want to read anything because that's going to taint my sensibility for writing. I just want to write what actually comes out of me and really be original. But of course, that's impossible. But yeah,
no words.
So.
Well, it's the flaw also is, not only are they already tainted, but no one would really want to read the crap that they would write if they were that. In fact, to be a writer, to be anything, represents having a tremendous amount of prior information, like a really good store of prior information. I suppose there is that occasional Tassidae tribes person who's been living alone in the jungle and comes out and starts playing some really interesting percussion or pan flute or something that nobody's ever heard before, and it's really wonderful. But for the most part, when somebody's good at something, whether it's writing or music or art or whatever, it's because they've acquired a tremendous amount a huge bank of information about what has come before that was
good.
And
they've synthesized all this into something new.
Yeah. But at the same time, Colin, don't you feel as a writer that the thing that you want to do is to come up with something that grows out of your own unique sensibility and in some way thus is original, even because even along with the fact that the voices and the language and the words are received in some way, you want that 0.1%, right?
Oh yes, I think that's true, but my quote unquote original voice is still a synthesis and a distillation of Yeah, I mean, if I get it, if I manage to come up with something. I mean, actually, this show is a pretty interesting example in a sense that we came in here. This may be too much inside baseball, but I'll tell a little bit of the story. When I first was being interviewed to come to work here, I wasn't really a public radio person or something, and there's this great guy who's not here anymore, who was, I think, general manager or something at the time, and I was at a meeting with him and some other people, Mr. Diakoski, and this guy is a great guy, but he slid over to the table towards me, this huge book, this big kind of loosely bound book that was like public radio best practices or something. And he said, "You're really going to want to read this." and I can't remember whether I said it out loud or not, but I was thinking, there's no way I'm going to read that. And it's the last thing in the world I want to do because, I mean, I'd like to try to do something a little different here, whatever it is. The last thing I want to know is what the rules are. And I think that's true. I think, even I'm looking over at you because of Twain. I think with Twain, it's not that Twain started writing in a completely different language or anything like that, but he does represent a leap suddenly, a leap into vernacular, right? I mean, you're the Twain person. I'll let you take over.
But I'm nowhere near an expert. But yeah. I think because of the way that he could relate to the common man, because he had experienced so much across his lifetime. It was that relatability that really spoke to and continues to speak to people. It may not have been completely original. Some of the stories that he had were things that he experienced or heard from others and that type of thing. But that's what made him so approachable for so many readers, throughout generations.
But I'm absolutely convinced that I have never had an original idea, and despite a lifetime of trying.
And you know what? I'm going to go further out on the ice with you, maybe even fall in, but maybe there's a Darwinian component that says a totally original way of thinking is contrary to your continued existence. I mean, if there's a guy who comes up with, I just invented the bow and arrow, but it fires backwards, then that's the end of that idea.
Maybe we should have said original good idea.
Yeah, right. So a totally original brain is not going to serve you well in the world, probably.
Well, one of the things we talked about as we were emailing back and forth about this was Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions, where he basically once again posits the same pattern, which is long stretches of flat water, punctuated occasionally by these just eruptions, these geysers the Copernican revolution being, I think, his favorite example. Just, so that's 1,400 years of thinking about the setup of the universe one way. And it can't be done by one person. It's not just Copernicus. It's Galileo. It's Kepler. It's all these other people. That suddenly there's like a whole bunch of people who figure something out and boom, the whole thing goes off in a different direction.
And they're in jail.
Yeah, exactly. And you will usually pay some kind of a price for that. And there was this terrific documentary. I'm talking way too much, but there was this terrific documentary on this past weekend on Studio 360. It originated on WNYC about 1913, which was one of those years where everything just went nuts. It was Duchamp, it was Schoenberg, it was famously Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, where everything new happened in 1 year, and people freaked out, and
Picasso,
and there were riots.
Yeah,
because people they don't like new ideas that much. I think that's part of the other problem with new ideas. They don't like them. They don't like being told the universe isn't set up the way that they've been told, and they don't like hearing music that isn't anything.
Why don't they? I mean, some people like new ideas. Why is it such a threat that that something's? I guess it forces you to do something differently, and
it has to change your brain, right? When you hear this stuff for the first time, or see Guernica or whatever it is, it's got to mess with your head, man.
But isn't that good?
Yeah,
we like comfort. We find comfort in continuity, and I think even as things evolve, we tend to feel more comfortable with those ideas because they're built on the ones that we're already comfortable with, and so it's that kind of smooth upward trajectory rather than the big old wave that comes along, and we feel toppled at that point. So I think some people are set up to just want that sort of smooth, and then there are others that are really open to that sort of shake-up and originality and are willing to be stuck in jail.
And Jim, how many hundreds of artists have you worked with who start to develop this exciting new sound, and then in their concerts, of course, everybody shows up at the concerts and says, "I hope he plays all his hits. I hope he plays
oh my God!
Really
well, yeah. I think it was Sammy Davis Jr. that said, if you're going to have a hit, you better fall in love with it because you're going to sing it the rest of your life. I think. There's no way to make music without a prior vocabulary unless you do play the pan flute. Who was the guy, the pan flute guy? He was so great. He was like, there was that whole...
But no one remembers him.
Yeah, no one does. Yeah, that's right. So he originaled himself right out of the public consciousness.
Yeah, just another thing that there's so many things about this that fascinate me and that could tie into this, but I just quickly, and I don't know how well this ties in, but one of the first links I circulated, and we've got an interesting call from Janet in North Haven, which I'll also take. Our number, 860-275-7266. We're talking about the whole idea, are there things that people do that are strictly, truly original, that really represent kind of a vivid departure from everything else that's come before? How often does that actually happen? 860-275-7266. Well, back to your students who don't want to read anything because they don't want to be influenced by anything. There's sort of almost a comic image of that, and it's Jonathan Franzen. Jonathan Franzen famously goes through these periods where he sits blindfolded with earplugs in, and he tries to isolate himself from everything, so he'll be absolutely all alone with his thoughts.
Elvis Costello used to I'm not going to listen to any music for a year before I write a record.
Yeah.
But he's written 40 albums so how can it's
and
impossible.
Elvis Costello stands out to me as, in some ways, a deeply original artist, but also one of the most, and syncretistic isn't the right word, but one of the most synthesizing artists.
Right, absolutely.
A guy who really pulls on every musical. He's an omnivore too.
Right,
more than most people. He's very aware of Rodgers and Hart, and he's very aware of punk.
And Kronos Quartet.
And Sophie Ottermuller or whatever her name is. The other one I was going to make is that, the other person who's trying to do this right now in a different way or exploring this question in a different way, and then we'll get to phone calls, is Adam Platt. I circulated this link early on. Adam Platt is the food critic for New York Magazine. And so food critics, because they have a different kind of anxiety of influence, their anxiety of influence is that if they're in a restaurant and the restaurant owner knows who they are, this will no longer be a pure experience. It will be they'll be catered to in a way that they don't want to be. So you have Ruth Reichel, who famously did wear all these disguises and stuff like that to fool people, and they always make their reservations in names not their own. But Adam Platt finally said, "Hey, you know what? Everybody knows what I look like. Every restaurateur of any merit in New York City knows who I am and what I look like. I'm sure my picture's up in every kitchen. So let's dispense with all this." And he put his picture on the cover of New York Magazine, or they put his picture on the cover of New York Magazine. And what did you think of that?
I didn't like it because I think that a food critic should be anonymous. But he made an interesting case. He sort of said, well, as long as they don't know I'm coming in advance, then it's going to be the food. And if they send me some extra things, I'm just going to sort of shoo them away. But it seemed like, is that his ego that wants to say, he wants to be a celebrity just like anyone else, or what? I didn't know of him before, so that's my first reaction.
I'd like to think that it's not self-serving like that. I'd like to think that he's sort of unwilling to play the game anymore, because he does acknowledge that every restaurateur knows what his face looks like, and probably some, fairly often people who dine out often may recognize him as well. So he's still trying to put the parameters into place of they don't know I'm coming, that type of thing.
You review restaurants sometimes. You haven't done that in a while, but
yeah, because there hasn't been too much new stuff that comes out.
She reviews restaurants under a pseudonym, so people wouldn't even know to put.
Right now, it's probably mostly donuts. So
yeah, there's a lot of donuts involved and a lot of noodles involved in this.
Right.
Yeah, you can't trust the restaurant criticism of a pregnant woman.
Exactly.
Anyway. They'll eat anything.
So is there any difference though between this? Because isn't a chef going to now perform for him? And I can recall one time playing in Nashville, and Alison Krauss came in to see us, and I was never more nervous in my life. But the band played really good because of that. Mm-hmm. Probably would have played pretty good anyways, I would hope. But I know I was really nervous. So does that make the chef nervous? Because the chef is doing a performance right now for this guy. So does it?
And is that good or bad?
Well, I don't think it changes the experience, because he's just making sure this guy gets a good meal. Unless he does some, conflated thing off the menu that's off the menu.
He would have had that performance going whether this guy's face was on the cover of the magazine or not. Maybe more chefs will know now if he's going to a lesser-known restaurant or one that's not, on their toes about that.
Yeah, I think in some ways this is a nice equalizer. First of all, let me just say, I remember one night going into a restaurant with Greg Morago, who was at that time reviewing restaurants for Northeast Magazine and the Hartford Courant, and there were 4 of us or 5 of us there, and I was the first person to get to the table, and I watched the restaurant people, the people who ran the restaurant, ID everybody, not just Greg. They knew who every single person sitting at the table was, and kind of alluded to that. And I mean, Adam Platt is playing at a much higher level, and really any restaurant owner of any significance in New York knows exactly what he looks like. And the people that might not be fair to would be maybe the really naive person who's just opened up this really cool, out-of-the-box, deeply original, just to go back to our earlier topic, fusion taco place in the East Village or something, who's the one person who doesn't know who Adam is or what he looks like and doesn't know enough to suck up to him.
So he was doing it for them,
yeah,
right?
Well, you could at least say you're putting everybody on the same playing field. Let me grab a few calls here, too. A lot of people calling in here. We'll start with Cassandra. If I can make the mouse work, we will start with Cassandra in Simsbury. There we go. Hi, Cassandra. You're on the air.
Hey, Colin. So I teach a course at CCSU called Aesthetic and Critical Dialogue about art. And my students frequently have difficulty differentiating between or articulating a difference between original and one of a kind. And we talk about that a lot. I play this game called In, Out, Maybe, where they have to rank artwork and objects and artifacts to determine why they think it's art or not, and then kind of put the criteria down in a list. And originality always comes up as the top of the list for many of them, but yet they can't articulate what that means. And so many times when they define original, they define it as one of a kind. But then we start arguing about, well, this is a one-of-a-kind piece, but it's not original because it stemmed from something for which the artist has been inspired. So it's really I love playing the devil's advocate and getting them arguing about it,
Sounds like a great class.
Yeah, I want to take it.
Yeah,
but I also want to know, do you define originality at the end of the course? Because I'd like to know what it is.
Because I don't have the perfect definition either. But, I mean, I completely concur that I don't think anything is original anymore. And, art students always think that they have the best ideas that are completely original and they should automatically get A's, right? But
gravitas.
I think the fine arts in particular bear the biggest burden, right? Because after a while you have Barnett Newman and people like that doing work that then lies open to my kid could do that accusation, because they are sort of overthrowing a certain tradition of craft and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something about a subject, about the person's, I would sort of throw in also the word individuality. Like there's something about, I think when I really like a work of art, it's because I feel like there's something in the creator of it that's speaking to me that feels like it's just between me and that person. There's something about it having come from the sort of deep fund of real subjectivity in the person who did it that makes me feel satisfied as a art viewer or consumer.
Let me grab a couple more calls here, then we do have to move on, switch subjects here. Here's Christian in Portland. Hi, Christian.
Hi, how are you, Colin and Jim? A couple of things. First of all, Jim, you were thinking of Zamfir as far as the pan flute
Thank you
players.
so much. Yeah.
But
yeah, and also, Jim, you and I have a mutual friend who always told me, if you're going to steal from the best, and that was Big Al. And here's a quite accomplished guy who really knew what he was doing.
That's why he plays with me.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's unclear who's stealing from whom here.
No, I think it's clear. I steal from him.
It's a great quote, but and last call will be from Janet in North Haven. Hi, Janet.
Hey, how are you?
Just fine.
Good. So my absolutely original and completely creative voice is Verlin Klinkenborg, who was one of the on the editorial board of the New York Times and who last week announced that he was retiring. And when I read it, I burst into tears, which surprised me very much. But I think in part because he always said something that was new and original and uplifting and wondrous, full of wonder for the world. And especially after reading everything else on the editorial and the op-ed page, it was just uplifting and wonderful, and I'm really sad that he's gone.
Well, it also goes to that whole question of operating within institutions, which will lead us nicely into our next segment. But so Verlin Klinkenborg, who wrote these kind of incredibly pastoral, rural, kind of farm-oriented essays on the New York Times editorial page, the real question was, how did he ever persuade them to let him do that? Because it's such a departure from everything else that they do. It really is. It's not their best standards and practices. It's something really, really different, which he was able to pull off for quite a long time. And some of the excitement of seeing that work is seeing it in a context where you wouldn't expect it. All right, we have to stop because we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about something else. So every once in a while, somebody gets into trouble because of what they say, and because what they say conflicts somehow with the value system that their employers either espouse or secretly hold. So we saw this a few weeks ago on the news, talking about Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty, who was suspended, although not for very long, and not with much conviction by A&E for some of his thoughts about gay marriage, which, as we later learned, turned out to be some of his less incendiary thoughts and more palatable thoughts compared to other thoughts that he turns out to have. However, that's not what we're going to talk about, although we may tie it into what we're talking about. The case in point this week, and his dismissal actually happened quite a long time ago, is Chris Kluwe. Chris Kluwe, who did not play this season for the Miami Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings, where he's a punter. They wish they were in Miami. The Minnesota Vikings, where he's a punter. And he, Chris Kluwe, just to kind of set the stage, he's been a very atypical NFL player in a lot of different ways. He comes across as very verbal, smart, literate, interested in a lot of other things. He's kind of a hero within the world of gamers in particular. He's really into video games, and he's constantly being invited to talk about video games and stuff like that. I think he's been on Wait, Don't Tell Me as the Not My Job guy. He's that kind of guy. He's sort of and the only problem that he has now is he can't be an NFL punter who's that kind of guy, because the Minnesota Vikings got rid of him. In Deadspin this week, an online sports site, he wrote a long essay saying basically that he was gotten rid of mainly because of his outspokenness about certain things, especially gay marriage, but also at the time of the changeover in popes. He also took to Twitter to offer some of his thoughts about how the Roman Catholic Church had behaved institutionally, and was told by his employers to shut up about that. And he described a situation where the special teams coach, his immediate supervisor, was actively homophobic and mean and rude about it, and that played some role, he thinks, in his downfall and his outplacement. So maybe not that unusual a story, but I don't know. Irene, what did you make of it?
Well, I was just thinking, too, that I like the way that he accused the other two guys of being cowards, because it seems like that really hurts.
Head coach and the general manager, I think.
Yeah, to sort of expose people for going along with the powers that be, no matter what they thought, because that was just their job, to say, sorry, we're going to have to fire you, and then to say they're cowards. I thought that was, pretty impressive.
It's certainly what made the link more viral, right? And that he called the head coach, who's actually been fired also as well as of the end of the season, and the general manager cowards.
Yeah, that does sort of tie into the Duck Dynasty thing, and I'm not doing this intentionally, but it does sort of speak to that sort of tacit complicity by stifling the speech that sort of A&E said, oh, we're going to suspend this guy, and they did for 20 minutes. And I don't even think they should suspend him, but they went through the whole kabuki of doing that. And these guys were just the opposite. They just tried to stifle this guy. So they are sort of tacitly complicit in that sort of homophobic thing. But this guy gets to be a folk hero now. And
he insists on it.
Right. And so maybe that becomes his
best
new
thing
gig.
that could have happened to him.
Well, in a way, he's not going to get a concussion from that. Unless it's from the guys in Duck Dynasty. I don't know, but
we're gonna go to Tracy Fastenberg in just a second. I just want to say, if you want to comment on this, if you followed this story over the course of the week, our number 860-275-7266. That's 860-275-7266. The world of Twitter is another option. You may tweet us at WNPR Colin. I know you had to ask your husband to sort of.
I did. I'm not a football fan.
In context,
exactly. So I had to ask him. Was he playing well? Was he actually a good punter? Or is it founded that maybe his dismissal had to do with his having these opinions
This is the moment at
outwardly.
which, by the way, husbands just make stuff up because they know you won't be able to check.
He was actually honest. He was like, I'm not positive, but I think he was sort of average, which you confirmed. But I think one of the things that kind of struck me as we talked about Duck Dynasty versus Chris Kluwe is that what Chris Kluwe was saying didn't necessarily go along with the persona of the NFL. We already talked about that he's sort of this intellectual, jack of all trades, Renaissance man, has all these other interests and abilities and
I don't know if we went as far as to say intellectual.
Well,
he's.
But this is new turf for the NFL. Certainly.
NFL players are not necessarily known for being academic. Just like the young man who was bullied on I can't remember the Miami team.
It was
right.
Hey, I remembered something about NFL.
Yeah, see,
but that sort of goes against that. Whereas what the Duck Dynasty guy was sort of spewing. Sort of went along with his persona and went along with what you would expect in certain ways from the portrayal of his character, whether that's truly him or not. I think maybe because it contradicts what you expect from the person, that's where the issues come in a little bit.
Because it's original.
Hey,
we like people.
I think
to be
from
original.
here on in, he should be known as the people's punter because that's the title he's kind of going for, right?
Yeah, I mean, I thought some of this rant was a lot about Chris Kluwe and maybe not so much about some of the issues behind it. I mean, I applaud his stance on all these issues, and I struggle with this because. For example, I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot of kabuki here in these stories too. In the case of the Duck Dynasty. A&E, the network, they knew who these guys were. They knew what they would believe. They know what they're selling. They're selling that kind of outspokenness and that kind of occasional shockingness. Just in the same sense that all the people who got instantly horrified by Don Imus were ignoring the fact that Don Imus had done the same thing essentially every day of his career for decades and decades, and lots of very estimable people would go on the show anyway. It didn't really bother them all that much. I look at Chris Kluwe, and to me it's a slightly different case. I think to me, what's interesting is that the NFL is looking to broaden its reach. First of all, the NFL is having the worst year of its existence. I mean, the evidence about concussions is mounting up in a very, very disturbing way. You had also, yes, the Miami Dolphins drama, the lineman who was bullying the other lineman in very unflattering ways. Meanwhile, for the NFL to survive, it really does need to broaden its reach, have more women watch it, have more, maybe even attract something of a gay and lesbian audience, and not be off-putting to anybody. So in a way, Chris Kluwe is the kind of guy that they would sort of want. It's just that
if he wasn't just the tip of the wave. Now,
right.
So the question I thought, does he drive a Subaru?
Well, exactly. Well, that's the difference. Okay, so that links us to the kind of the final place that we'll go here. So the NFL, on the one hand, really would like to make itself very friendly and a little softer and a little bit more cuddly so that other people could embrace it. And significantly, the owner of the Vikings, first of all, on a one-to-one basis, supported the stuff that Chris Kluwe was doing and is involved on his own in other organizations, including one organization that's credited with really helping New Jersey change its policies on gay marriage. So, I mean, it's not like the NFL is full of, homophobic people. I mean, there are probably a lot of homophobic people who are coaching special teams and stuff like that. But institutionally, the NFL would really like to do this. It just doesn't really know how to do it without breaking with its image. So let's take a look at somebody else who did do it. There was a piece in Slate magazine this week about how did that linkage happen? How did it happen that Subarus and lesbians became linked in people's minds? And the most recent example of this being sort of outwardly stated was the fabulous, wonderful Kate McKinnon on Saturday Night Live. She's pretending to be Billie Jean King. She's talking about the fact how cool she thinks it is, how she can't wait to go and be this lesbian woman in Russia to shock Putin because she's going to be part of the U.S. delegation to the Olympics there. So let's hear a little bit of Kate McKinnon.
Well, you look pretty excited to go to Sochi.
Yeah, I couldn't be more excited, Seth. I'm President Obama's big gay middle finger, and this bird's about to get flipped.
That's quite a big statement.
Yeah, you bet it is, Domino. BJK's about to double down, and Putin's going to find himself in the epicenter of a gay tornado. I'm going to drive my Subaru Outback into Red Square doing donuts and blasting Melissa Etheridge.
All right. That's right. So So basically that's Billie Jean King or really Kate McKinnon saying something that everybody kind of knows, right? You drive a Forester.
I just got a Forester in September, and everyone from my husband to very close friends has made the lesbian joke at some point. And when the article came out on Slate, I got it from 6 different people.
Wow. We had one for 11 years, and it just kind of ran out of gas. And so I asked my wife, what are the things that...
You actually can put more gas in them.
You're right. You
don't have to trade them in when they run out of gas. I know they get great mileage.
Yeah, no, and they come with 4 dogs and a practical haircut. No, I asked my wife what she liked about it, and she said that, they were romantic and dashing, and of course that was me. But no, she said they were. It was compact, full of features, and in her case, it had the weather band. And my wife is snowphobic, and was curdled in a ball this morning. But even bought a little weather band thing for her new car. But she didn't buy another Subaru. But I think she's going to wait till she comes out. That's not true.
But what was interesting about that article was that the Slate author, traced how Subaru had really actively courted that connection. It wasn't like they waited for somebody else to make it. They wanted that connection. They were smart enough to know that's a big market, right? And it's not as though it precludes anybody else owning a Subaru. I own a Subaru. What were you going to say?
Well, I'm just wondering if first of all, what it did to their sales, and maybe I guess it must have helped them, and I wonder so that goes back to the NFL story, and it makes me think about whether actually ultimately, since our country is going so far towards accepting homosexuality, if it would actually be, and maybe that's what you were implying, Colin, that it would be sort of good for the NFL, and even in terms of their audience, or is their audience so entrenched in that sort of traditional male, homophobic culture that it would backfire in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, and for me, that's a question more than an answer. I'm like, how big is the entrenched homophobic male culture? Is it big enough to sustain something that needs as much sustenance as the NFL needs to breathe, or does the NFL need to evolve, have more Jonathan Martin, he was the Bully E type players, have more Chris Kluwe type players front and center, intelligent, sensitive people that you can relate to if you're not sitting in a duck blind talking about God's plan for marriage.
Yeah, those people
it's interesting that we could actually have a conversation like this, a lesbian/Subaru conversation, and not feel like it's pejorative or in any way slanderous. It's people have come.
We'll check my email
later.
Yeah,
right. No, but I have a lot of gay women friends who make jokes about it, and just take a trip to Northampton, and it's a parking lot.
Of Subarus.
Subarus.
All right, before I do get email, I think we're going to wrap up this conversation. We got to leave time for endorsements, which is not an original idea, by the way. I stole endorsements from Slate Culture Gabfest. I mention that every 3 months or so nobody even suspects me of being Conan O'Brien.
This has nothing to do with what they're talking about, but when the last minutes of my life tick away, I'm going to be really annoyed that I spent 1 hour watching Hollywood Game Night. Actually, Jane Lynch is the host, so there is a connection. Today's show was produced by Colin and me. Get well, Betsy Kaplan. Our executive producer is Katie Tolarski, but she's sick too. And our tweetmaster, Greg Hill, is not here. And the person who was supposed to play the part of Bill Curry has a scratchy throat. Are you sensing a trend here? Super producer Lydia Brown came over from where we live and flew co-pilot today. For stories, links, photos, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff trying to punt a creme brulee, visit WNPR.org. On Monday, a PBS Frontline crew visits to tell the story of the other Wolf of Wall Street, Steve Cohen. And now, back to Colin.
So we've come to the part in our show where Irene Popoulos and Jim Chapdelaine and Tracy Wu Fastenberg and I will tell you about things that you might enjoy if you knew about them. Tracy Wu Fastenberg, you go first.
All right, I'm going to have to go ahead and endorse my Subaru Forester because as I was telling you guys, I was driving around this morning feeling very, very smug and safe in the snow because it did an amazing job.
Is it the four-wheel drive?
It is four-wheel or all-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive, yeah.
So it's always going, which is great. And then because we have made plenty of references to the fact that I'm pregnant, my favorite pregnancy blog right now is pregnantchicken.com because so many of these pregnancy sites are so like floofy and sort of flowery and everything. And this one's just sort of cynical and straight to the point, and has a good sense of humor about it.
What kinds of things do they cover on a pregnancy site like Pregnant Chicken? I mean, what do you read it to get?
Just general information, but it's sort of delivered with a little snark too, because everybody's like, oh, you're going to feel the first flutters, and on this blog it's sort of like, it's going to feel like a kid's kicking you in the gut and you're going to want to poke it back. So it's sort of a different, easier way to kind of ingest all of this information.
All right, Pregnant Snark. It's Pregnant Chicken. We'll check it out, even though we're not pregnant. We all have to go look at it. All right, go ahead, Jim.
I had hoped, we were this sort of last minute after the holiday, so I had hoped. I went to a movie to escape reality, and I had hoped that I would endorse it. I went to The Hobbit, and I noticed that I came out with a beard longer than any of the characters. So it's a long movie, but I did notice this. I caught myself doing this, like there's orcs and elves and dwarves and hobbits, and at one point, an elf jumps 50 feet in the air and slays 20 orcs, I thought, that couldn't happen. And I realized, what am I doing? I'm equivocating in The Hobbit. I'm saying that. I wonder just how many people do that. So, secondly, I want to thank people. I went on Facebook and I reached out for this little cureasc.org, which is a cancer I have dealt with and survived. I'm the longest survivor on the site, and in the short time that I did that, I've been able to raise $4,000. So I thank you guys. It was very moving for me.
All right, that is great. And if you find yourself really kind of fixating a lot on what the physical limitations of elves are or aren't, and whether elves could accomplish certain things, Patrick Scahill can direct you to some websites where you can spend a lot of time with like-minded people.
I do it with time travel movies too. I'm all in, and then hey, that couldn't happen. Wait a second.
All right, what have you got for us?
I also went to a movie, American Hustle, and I endorse it. The thing that I really like about David O. Russell's movies is that he talks about people that are sort of maybe odd and unusual, but not to make fun of them, to really get inside their experience in a way that I find moving and interesting.
David O. Russell, by the way, who did The Fighter, who did Silver Lining Playbook, who did a whole bunch of other movies that we've praised on this show in the past. And it's an incredible cast, too. I haven't seen it yet. I will be seeing many movies in the next 4 or 5 days because on Thursday of next week, David Edelstein will be in the studio with me. We'll be locking horns once again, as we've done so many times over the decades. So that means I have to get myself ready. And it could be also that the young upstart A.O. Scott, Tony Scott, will be joining us by phone. But I'll be seeing a lot of movies. I'm so late to all of the parties that I'm endorsing. First of all, let me do a plug, and that's for a week from Saturday, September 11th. Welcome to Bohemia. This is Greg Garcia's kind of traveling – I don't know what to call it exactly. It is, it's sort of a simulated bohemian party. You walk in and there's interesting art that's been hung on the walls, and there's things to eat and drink, and there are all kinds of performers in a kind of genre-defying manner doing all kinds of different stuff. And original stuff. It really is original. It really is fun. It's the kind of thing that you probably don't think we have in Hartford, but we do. It'll be at Theater Works. It's like a hermit crab. It finds different shells, and so it'll be at Theater Works on September 11th. I think
January 11th.
January. I'm having a really bad time. I actually wrote September 11th. That's really bad. January 11th. Anyway.
You're giving people lead time.
Exactly. And so it starts at 7 p.m., which is way too early for anything bohemian, but it really is a lot of fun. And if you're new to town and you can tell the difference between January and September and you want to maybe go to something that will give you a different flavor for Hartford, that's a lot of fun. Okay, I'm really late to these other parties. I just finished reading Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood, but I really think it's just Margaret Atwood is just a great writer anyway. She's just in that whole business of putting one word after another and one sentence after another. She's just really good at it. And this is a terrific book. It takes place in the future, very dystopian kind of future. But what it really is a dialogue. When you put the book down and you realize, it's been a very gripping story, but it's also a really interesting dialogue between the sciences and the humanities, between STEM, as it were, and the often imperiled humanities. And if you don't have the ability to ask really good evaluative questions about scientific progress, you get stuck with whatever scientific progress the scientists hand you, and they may not be thinking as humanistically as you are. So it's really great. And then I'm like Jim. This is kind of a medium recommendation, and I'm also late to this party. But the movie Prisoners, which came out last year, which I believe was 2013. I'm trying to orient myself in time better now, but which has an incredible cast. It's Hugh Jackman. It's Jake Gyllenhaal. It's and a wonderful, wonderful supporting cast too. A little bit of a horror movie, kind of a Hitchcockian horror movie, a little bit exploitive in some ways, but also a really interesting kind of ethical conundrum. All right, I'm being told to wrap things up. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Irene. I'll be back on Monday, which is not in September. It's in January. I'm absolutely sure of that.
On the radio, baby. You and me talking, laughing now.
I'm Kyone Wolf. All right, original thought. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Eleanor Roosevelt. Don't find fault, find a remedy. Henry Ford. Kyone Wolf loves Rush Limbaugh. Well, that's original. It hurts.